Brown Bess is a nickname of uncertain origin for the British Army's muzzle-loading smoothbore Land Pattern Musket and its derivatives. This musket was used in the era of the expansion of the British Empire and acquired symbolic importance at least as significant as its physical importance. It was in use for over 100 years with many incremental changes in its design. These versions include the long Land Pattern, short Land Pattern, India Pattern, new Land Pattern Musket, see Service Musket and others. The long Land Pattern Musket and its derivatives, all .75 caliber flintlock muskets, were the standard long guns of the British Empire's land forces from 1722 until 1838 when they were superseded by a percussion cap smoothbore musket. The British Ordnance System converted many flintlocks into the new percussion system known as the Pattern 1839 musket. A fire in 1841 at the Tower of London destroyed many muskets before they could be converted. Still, the Brown Bess saw service until the middle of the 19th century. Most male citizens of the American colonies were required by law to own arms and ammunition for militia duty. The long Land Pattern was a common firearm in use by both sides in the American War of Independence. In 1808 Sweden purchased significant numbers from the United Kingdom for use in the Finnish War. During the Musket Wars, Maori warriors used Brown Besses, having purchased them from European traders at the time. Some muskets were sold to the Mexican Army, which used them during the Texas Revolution of 1836 and the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. Brown Besses saw service during the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Zulu warriors, who had also purchased them from European traders, used them during the Anglo-Zulu War in 1879. One was even used in the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. Origins of the name: one hypothesis is that the Brown Bess was named after Elizabeth I of England, but this lacks support. It is not believed that this name was used contemporaneously with the early long pattern land musket but that the name arose in late years of the 18th century when the short pattern and India pattern were in wide use. Early uses of the term include the newspaper, the Connecticut Courant in April 1771, which said, "But if you are afraid of the sea, take Brown Bess on your shoulder and march." This familiar use indicates widespread use of the term by that time. The 1785 Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue, a contemporary work which defined vernacular and slang terms, contained this entry: Brown Bess, a soldier's firelock. To hug Brown Bess. To carry a firelock, or serve as a private soldier. Military and government records of the time do not use this poetical name but refer to firelocks, flintlock, muskets or by the weapon's model designations. Popular explanations of the use of the word brown include that it was a reference to either the color of the walnut stalks, or to the characteristic brown color that was produced by russeting, an early form of metal treatment. Others argue that mass-produced weapons of the time were coated in brown varnish on metal parts as a rust preventative and onward as a sealer. However, the Oxford English Dictionary notes that browning was only introduced in the early 19th century, well after the term had come into general use. Here the author confuses simple varnishing with the browning of metal, two entirely different things. Similarly, the word bess is commonly held to either derive from the word arquebus or blunderbuss or to be a reference to Elizabeth I, possibly given to commemorate her death. More plausible is that the term Brown Bess derived from the German words Braunbuss, or Braunbuss, meaning strong gun, or brown gun. King George I, who never spoke English and commissioned its use, was from Germany. Bess may be a corruption of bus. The OED has citations for brown musket dating back to the early 18th century which refer to the same weapon. Another suggestion is that the name is simply the counterpart to the earlier brown bill. However, the origin of the name may be much simpler, if vulgar. In the days of lace ruffles, perukes, and brocade, Brown Bess was a partner whom none could despise, an outspoken, flinty-lipped, brazen-faced jade, with a habit of looking men straight in the eyes. At Blenheim and Ramillies, fops would confess, they were pierced to the heart by the charms of Brown Bess. Kipling's poem most possibly hits the mark, although he may have based his poem on an earlier but similar Brown Bess poem published Flights of Fancy in 1792. Of course, the name could have been initially inspired by the older term of the brown bill, and perhaps the barrels were originally varnished brown, but it is well known in literary circles that the name Brown Bess during the period in question in the 17th to early 19th centuries is not a reference to a color or a weapon but to simply refer to a wanton prostitute, or harlot. Such a nickname would have been a delight to the soldiers of the era who were from the lower classes of English and then British society. So far, the earliest use noted so far of the term Brown Bess was in a 1631 publication, John Donne's Polydeuron, or a miscellanea of mopoun rule, philosophical, and theological pound tenses. At page 152. Things proffered and easy to come by, diminished theme pound selves in reputation and price, for how full of pangs and totage is a wailing lover, for it may be some brown beast a pound sigh. But let a beauty fall a weeping, overpressed with the sick passion. She favors in our thoughts, something Turnbull. The Land Pattern Muskets. From the 17th century to the early years of the 18th century, most nations did not specify standards for military firearms. Firearms were individually procured by officers or regiments as late as the 1740s, and were often custom-made to the tastes of the purchaser. As the firearm gained ascendancy on the battlefield, this lack of standardization led to increasing difficulties in the supply of ammunition and repair materials. To address these difficulties, armies began to adopt standardized patterns. A military service selected a pattern musket to be stored in a pattern room. There it served as a reference for arms makers, who could make comparisons and take measurements to ensure that their products matched the standard. Stress-bearing parts of the Brown Bess, such as the barrel, lockwork, and sling swivels, were customarily made of iron, while other furniture pieces such as the butt plate, trigger guard and ramrod pipe were found in both iron and brass. It weighed around 10 pounds and it could be fitted with a 17 inches triangular cross-section bayonet. The weapon did not have sights, though it could be aimed using the bayonet lug as a crude sight. The earliest models had iron fittings but these were replaced by brass in models built after 1736. Wooden ramrods were used with the first guns but were replaced by iron ones, although guns with wooden ramrods were still issued to troops on American service until 1765 and later to Loyalist units in the American Revolution. Wooden ramrods were also used in the dragoon version produced from 1744 to 1771 and for Navy and Marine use. Accuracy of the Brown Bess was fair, as with most other muskets. The effective range is often quoted as 175 yards, but the Brown Bess was often fired en masse at 50 yards to inflict the greatest damage upon the enemy. Military tactics of the period stressed mass volleys and massed bayonet charges, instead of individual marksmanship. The large soft projectile could inflict a great deal of damage when it hit and the great length of the weapon allowed longer reach in bayonet engagements. As with all similar smoothbore muskets, it is possible to improve the accuracy of the weapon by using musket balls that fit more tightly into the barrel. The black powder would quickly foul the barrel, making it more and more difficult to reload a tighter fitting round after each shot and increasing the risk of the round jamming in the barrel during loading. Since tactics at the time favored close-range battles and speed over accuracy, smaller and more loosely fitting musket balls were much more commonly used. The Brown Bess had a barrel bore of .75 caliber, and the typical round used was around .69 caliber. While the looser-fitting musket ball reduced the effective range of a single musketeer firing at a single man-sized target to around 50 yards to 75 yards, the Brown Bess was rarely used in single combat. Since individual soldiers are not aimed for en masse volleys, the effective range of the Brown Bess when fired en masse was easily 100 yards or more. Standard European targets included strips of cloth 50 yards long to represent an opposing line of infantry, with the target height being 6 feet for infantry and 8 feet, 3 inches for cavalry. Estimations of hit probability at 175 yards could be as high as 75% in volley fire. This however was without allowances for the gaps between the soldiers in an opposing line, for overly tall targets or the confusing and distracting realities of the battlefield. Modern testers shooting from rigid rests, using optimum loads and fast priming powder, report groups of circa 5 inches at 50 yards. Variations equals. Many variations and modifications of the standard pattern musket were created over its long history. The earliest version was the long Land Pattern of 1722, a 62-inch long and with a 46-inch barrel. It was later found that shortening the barrel did not detract from accuracy but made handling easier, giving rise to the militia pattern of 1756 and the short Land Pattern of 1768, which both had a 42-inch barrel. Another version with a 39-inch barrel was first manufactured for the British East India Company, and was eventually adopted by the British Army in 1790 as the India pattern. Towards the end of the life of the weapon there was a change in the system of ignition. The flintlock mechanism, which was prone to misfiring, especially in wet weather, was replaced by the more reliable percussion cap. The last flintlock pattern manufactured was selected for conversion to the new system as the pattern 1839. A fire at the Tower of London destroyed large stocks of these in 1841, so a new pattern 1842 musket was manufactured. These remained in service until the outbreak of the Crimean War when they were replaced by the Mini and the P-53 Enfield rifled musket. See also, British military rifles, Charleville musket, M1752 musket. Notes. Other references, Compston, Mike. The Guns of Empire, 18th Century Martial Muskets Guns Magazine, August 2008, pages 60. FMG Publications, San Diego, CA, Reed, Stuart. British Redcoats 1793 1815 Warrior Series, Osprey Publishing. External links, detailed Brown Bess images and information. Correct source of images with blue background. Brown Bess, Musket Misconception, Kipling's poem Brown Bess Musket, 3 shots in 46 seconds. Live fire volley at 60 yards. www.kings.com, Revolutionary War soldier explaining flintlock musket, a demonstration of a British Brown Bess musket, Brown Bess, musket firing demonstration part 1, Brown Bess, musket firing demonstration part 2, how to fire a Brown Bess musket, English heritage, Brown Bess flintlock musket accuracy, updated.